Convenience inits are kind of inits that are useful for special cases. Imagine a situation where you have to initialize something, but you don't have the arguments the way that you would usually have them. You wouldn't have your name and email and UID or whatnot. Instead, you have them in something like a dictionary, or if you want to put some default values for whatever reason. For those kind of situations, we use a convenience init. Now, the only thing that's really important about a convenience init is that within the body of a convenience init, you have to initialize your object. Let's go ahead and see how we do that. I'm going to go to Xcode. I'm going to start a new project. And this one, I'm going to call it convenience init. And in my convenience init, I have, just like all the other times, I have a class user. And my class user has, let's say, only one attribute called var name string. And then I have an init. And in the init, it's called input name string, which makes self name become input name. Now, if I want to write a convenience init, this is what I should do. I should say convenience init. And in my convenience init, irrelevant of what you want to pass in as an argument, you must do this. You have to do a self init. So I have to say self.init, one of these other ways of doing it. So I'm going to say self init with no name, for instance. So that's the convenience init. Now you might be wondering, well, you're calling a method to call another method and nothing else is happening. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're reading some information from some backend, and backends, they don't have anything to do with classes or users or whatnot. Usually what you have in a backend is either integer or a string or an array or a dictionary for the most part. And for the most part, the important elements are arrays and dictionaries. So you have your information set in dictionaries or arrays, and they don't know anything called a user. For instance, your user might be written in the backend like this. It might be var user dictionary is going to be name key, and that's going to be name. All right, and they have another value, let's say UID key, and that UID key is a random set of characters. So this is essentially what you get from your backend. You don't get a class coming from your backend. You get information in a user dictionary. And now I want to use this information to produce a new object from my user class. In a situation like that, I'm going to say, well, give me a convenience init with an input dictionary, which is of the type dictionary with a string. You could write a string and a string because we know they are both strings, or I'm going to say a string and any, just so that, you know, we can see more of the options. So my convenience init reads an input dictionary with these values. So theoretically, it would be like this. Theoretically, I would have, remember, this came from backend. So now I'm going to say var my user is user, and which one I can use? Can I use it with the name or can I use it with the dictionary? So it's a lot better to use the dictionary one. I'm going to say dictionary, and that is the user dictionary. So now I have a new user being produced by this dictionary, and I have to do whatever I have to do inside my init. So in my init, I'm going to say let's call it red name to be. What is it going to be? It's going to be input dictionary value for name key, which I know it exists as, what would I want to read it as? I would want to read it as a string. The reason I need the as a string is because this is any. I don't know what are the values in my dictionary. So that's one. I'm going to call this one red UID, and that's going to be for UID key as a string. And then when I'm initializing, I'm going to say self init with red name. And that's about that. Of course, in this example, I'm not using my UID. If you wanted, you could actually add another one. Say this is a UID, that's a string. It has to have an input UID, and that must be a string. I'm constantly making this mistake. Self.uid is going to be input UID. And then of course here we had to do this one as well. Say, well, that is going to be with the red UID. So convenience inits are used for situations such as this one, when our information for specific cases are not being fed to us the way that our init works. Instead, we do whatever we have to do and then we call our init. This line essentially is the most important aspect of a convenience init, recalling your self init based on, well, whatever you have found in there. So that's about the convenience inits. Now a question that you might be having, and that is for you if you're really perceptive at this level, is this a safe way of assuming imp dictionary has a value called name key and it is a string? And to be honest, no, that is not a safe way of doing it. And since this is not a safe way of doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use guard. So let's go ahead and do that. So in here, I'm going to say guard. And what I'm guarding is this guy as optional a string and this guy as optional a string. And if that was the case, great. If it wasn't the case, return nil. Now, let me quickly explain what happened in here and you can see how it works. All right. I'm saying guard these two values, read name or read name, to be input dictionary name key if it did exist and if it was a string. So this either will fail, which takes us to the else, or it will succeed, which takes us to red UID, which does exactly the same thing. Either this succeeds, finds a string in UID key and puts in the red UID, or it fails and goes in here. Now, if we do end up in here, if we do end up in the else, we have to return nil. And we have to say, well, this method failed, we couldn't do anything. Let's skip that for a second. Let's assume we did succeed. And if we did succeed, it means that now we can go ahead and do a self init. So in doing a self init, we put the two values and we do everything as we used to do it before. Now, here is an error in here that Xcode is telling me. Xcode is saying you can't return nil. I'm assuming init to work no matter what. Only a failable initializer can return nil, which means your convenience init should convert into a failable one. There is a chance that it doesn't work. So I'm going to write this here, a failable init. It means it's an init that it might actually fail. Otherwise, it will work. So that's about that. With that in mind, we covered a class with inits and convenience inits and failable convenience inits. And we used it with a dictionary, which is a very common practice when reading information from our backend. And with that, we'll move on to our next lesson.